So, Carmelo Anthony is officially back. He is signed with the Portland Trailblazers on a non-guaranteed contract. Now, what does this mean for Melo, and what does this mean for the Portland Trailblazers? It's almost been a year since Melo was in the league. In fact, his last NBA game was in November of 2018, but realistically, it's basically been about 2 years. Because he only played 10 games in Houston, and obviously that didn't work out, even though he did put up some decent numbers. 13 points on 40% shooting and 32% from 3. I believe that Melo all along was a scapegoat for the Houston Rockets, who had a horrible start to the year. Eventually, obviously, they picked it up towards the end of the year. They made the playoffs, they did okay, but Melo at that point was clearly off the team. In Oklahoma, they were never going to bash Paul George or Russell Westbrook because those were the two stars. If anybody, they were going to bash Carmelo Anthony. But he still performed at a decent pace. 16 points, 6 rebounds, 35% from 3 and 40% from the field with 15 field goal attempts per game. So, not to mention he played 78 games that season. So he actually was a very solid contributor. Obviously, we know who Melo is. He's a scorer. That's what he's best at. He's always been that. But the one thing that Melo had was a little bit of an ego. He wasn't willing to come off the bench. He wasn't willing to be a sixth man. Obviously, that started to transpire in Oklahoma. Eventually, he went to Houston, and that became something that I guess he had to just become accustomed to. Otherwise, there were going to be problems. But in saying that, he did play 29 minutes per game the last time he was on an NBA team. So with Portland, it will be interesting to see what happens, because obviously they have a team that is already developed. They have a team that is ready-made for the playoffs. How does Melo fit in? One thing that's extremely interesting is that before Melo actually signed with Oklahoma and before he signed with Houston, the Portland Trailblazers, led by Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, were actually pushing extremely hard for Melo. They knew that he would be the perfect fit for their team. A guy that can stretch the floor, space out, let them go to work, but be open in the corner, be open for a catch and shoot, either through the mid-range, which he's best at, or by hitting a 3. He was the perfect fit for the Portland Trailblazers. But this was 2 seasons ago. Is Melo the same player as 2 seasons ago? Probably not. He's 2 years older. He hasn't been in the league for the last season, so Melo is a different player to the guy that was signed by the Oklahoma City Thunder. The difference is, 2 seasons ago, the Blazers had Al-Farouq Aminu, who was great defensively, but he definitely lacked offensively. Melo is the flip of that. He's a great offensive talent, but at times can be poor defensively. Either way, Damian Lillard pushed for Melo. He really wanted him on his team. When you look at old interviews from 2 seasons ago, Dame was clear that he wanted Melo on this team.
Why should Melo consider waiving his no-trade clause to team up with you guys in Portland?
I think just because of the fit. I think he fits really well with what we have. With myself, CJ, Nurk, and a lot of the guys on the team are young, but have been getting minutes for years now, and you add him, I think we take a step up. We go to the next level. So I know that we could win with him, and I know that we can go much deeper into the playoffs.
Have you reached out to Carmelo?
I spoke to him because obviously he makes us a better team. He makes us a better team. So I mean, obviously with that being out there and that being a real possibility, I don't see why I wouldn't reach out to him and let him know that the interest is mutual if he's interested in us.
And finally, he gets his man. He went to Oklahoma and then Houston. Portland was always there as an opportunity. But why does Damian Lillard want Carmelo Anthony so much? Well, let's break it down. When looking at the Portland Trailblazers depth chart, it's obvious that they have their point guard and their shooting guard for many years. But their recent acquisition of Hassan Whiteside to provide them with some defensive presence while Nurkic is out, Kent Bazemore, who's a 3-and-D guy, and Mario Hezonja, who's actually okay. Melo, he fits in well though, because Melo can play the 4, because their power forward position is kind of lacking. They have Anthony Tolliver, who, to me personally, I would have Melo over Anthony Tolliver. I've watched a lot of Portland games. Tolliver has been really inconsistent. He's a guy that they use to spread out the floor, and that's exactly what Melo is good for, spreading out the floor. Not to mention, he has the post-up game. If he can get into rhythm, it's going to be fun to watch Dame, CJ, and Melo go at it on the offensive end. The one question that obviously we all have for Melo is that, number one, if he doesn't start, how will he impact the team? Number two, Will he still be a Melo that can contribute? Will he still be able to drop 10 to 15 points per game, maybe even more, some games less? How will his offensive capabilities transpire with the Portland Trailblazers now? Obviously, he's on a non-guaranteed contract, which means it's just a test. Can he perform? If he performs, he will stay on the roster. If he doesn't, he will probably get waived once again. This is his last chance, but we've seen a guy like Dwight Howard for the Lakers really turn around his career. Do you see Carmelo Anthony turning around his career just like Dwight Howard? Let me know down below in the comment section. I personally can see it. I've made countless videos in the past talking about both Melo and Dwight, which you can find on the channel. I said Dwight Howard would find a team and he would turn his career around, and I also said the same thing about Melo. Once he found a team, if he can adjust to his role, I believe he can turn his career around. And Portland is the perfect team for that, because at this stage, the Portland Trailblazers aren't actually that good of a team. Currently, they're sitting 13th in the Western Conference behind the Pelicans and the Golden State Warriors, and they have been pretty inconsistent. They lost with Dame and CJ and basically their whole team to a Warriors team without anybody playing, which that was really surprising, but they've only won 4 games this season. Of course, there are a number of other teams that have only won 4 games, and of course, it's only the start of the season, but 4-8 is not what the Portland Trailblazers were expecting starting out this season. So, I think at this stage, it's a good move to get Melo, see how he plays, see how he fits in, because the Portland Trailblazers need something to get their team back rolling and ready for the playoffs. Because we all assume that they will make the playoffs this season once again. But the Western Conference, as we know, is so stacked. And we have teams like the Mavericks and the Timberwolves, and obviously the biggest surprise in the Phoenix Suns, that have really performed. Which means if these teams continue to perform throughout the year, then Portland may find it harder to get into the playoffs if they're playing the way that they're currently playing. So, Melo, this is your chance. This is what the Portland Trailblazers need, because they need something to spark up their offense. And it's going to be interesting to see how well he can play on the defensive end as well. Obviously, he's been working out ever since he got waived by the Houston Rockets. He's obviously not in NBA game fitness level or NBA game ready, because that takes some time to get into it. But what Melo does provide is a spark either off the bench or as a scorer that the Portland Trailblazers can utilize. And there was a really good video posted by a channel called Heat Check, and they talked about why Carmelo Anthony would be a great fit for the Houston Rockets. So I'll play it on the screen right now, but if you look at it, there are countless times last season where Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum would get a pick and roll, but the defense would just pressure, force them into a double team, and the Portland Trailblazers obviously would just swing the ball around. It ended up being in Al-Farouq Aminu's hands a lot of the time, because obviously the defense wanted it in his hands instead of Dame or CJ's, and he would brick many shots, which is why they needed a guy to spread the floor. They tried to get pieces this offseason with Kent Bazemore, but these guys, even though they're pretty good players and they have been playing well, they haven't really contributed, especially since they do play at the small forward position, which they need somebody to stretch the floor at the power forward position. They got Anthony Tolliver, but he hasn't really been that player because he just hasn't really performed. So Melo has the opportunities here. I'm going to end with this. When you look at the Portland Trailblazers stats for the 2019-2020 season, and you look at points per game, Dame and CJ combined for 50 points per game, which is majority of the team's points, but then Hassan Whiteside is your third leading scorer. For a guy that's a big man that isn't even an offensive talent in this league, as the third leading scorer, it's a little bit of a worry. He averages just under 15 points, but then you've got Rodney Hood at 12 points per game in 29.6 minutes per game, which isn't really that effective. Obviously, Zach Collins got injured, which is why they picked up Melo, because they needed a 4, and Melo can play as the stretch 4. Ken Bazemore's only averaging 8 points. Mario Hezonja is only averaging 5. So if Melo can fit into this system, I believe he could really be the third leading scorer or even the fourth leading scorer on this team, above Rodney Hood and above Hassan Whiteside, maybe with 16, 15 points per game. They just need that extra scoring punch, because really they don't have many scorers on this team besides CJ and Damian Lillard. So what do you think? Number 1, do you think Carmelo Anthony can return and stay on this roster for the whole entire season? Do you think Melo can actually help this team advance into the playoffs? Do you think that Melo will just not be a good fit and not work out and may never find an NBA team again? What do you think about Carmelo Anthony? Do you think he can revive his career just like Dwight Howard did with the Lakers? And personally, I believe the Blazers is the best fit for Carmelo Anthony over the Lakers, over the Clippers, because they already have their team set. Portland actually needs this. So I believe Portland, perfect fit for Melo. So let me know what you think down below. With that said, if you enjoyed the video, I'd greatly appreciate